Oh, just caught you at the perfect time. Today, at the Shark Scale, we're looking at Dark Tide, another requested movie, featuring Halle Berry of all people. But before it comes to find us, let's just get right into it. We're off.
So Dark Tide takes place off the coast of Africa and stars Halle Berry, the shark whisperer it seems, and she's with the love of her life and are about their business as they're trying to make like a documentary or a movie about her swimming with the sharks. Well, as she is filming it seems well enough when her partner, that is like a father figure to her it seems, is actually killed by one of these sharks. He gets chewed into and dies. We jump ahead a year where Halle Berry's character is terrified of the water and has seemingly had a falling out with her marriage and money as she's basically bankrupt, giving tours to people on the coast of Africa. Well, her husband or fiance or boyfriend or whatever the hell he is now, he just shows back up with a proposition for money to take this rich dude and his son to swim with the sharks for a boatload of money, literally. And it's up to her to deal with her struggles of getting back in the water, I guess. The story in this movie is really questionable. It's questionable for a couple reasons. First off, I'm just going to say that this is not really a shark movie. This is a movie with sharks in it. Sure, sharks play a big part of the movie, but it's just not a shark movie. It's a character-driven movie first and foremost. Second, the movie, it's just way too long. This movie goes on and on and on for far too long, and the plot is really stretched thin, especially by the end of it, and I really was waiting for it to end. The initial premise isn't terrible, but the way the plot progresses really just kind of meanders, and the pacing is really bad, and it just doesn't do anything interesting, and by the end of the movie, I was really waiting for it to be over. I'd say the first hour and 15 minutes of the movie, like legit hour at least of the movie, is setting up the last 10 to 15 minutes of the movie. Like the first hour alone just has way too much talking, unnecessary dialogue, random struggles from all the characters, and the bottom line was I was just not having it. The last like 10 to 15 minutes of the movie is actually somewhat interesting and stuff actually happens. It's just a shame it takes way too long to get to the point, and it's not even worth it by the end. In addition, the ending is just way too fast, and the movie just kind of ends with no real conclusion, honestly. It's like they built up these characters in the story for so long for this quick ending that is almost blink and you'll miss it levels of fast, so that was disappointing. Most of the characters have good motivation and are portrayed decently at best, but nobody really just stood out all that much, and I thought that despite all the exposition and how long the movie is, some of the characters still felt underdeveloped, and I think that's just a failure in the character development department, and I really did not care for any character in the movie except for Halle Berry's. She was good and was easily the best actor in the movie, I might add, but she was the only character I gave two craps about. Now, a character-driven movie is fine. There's even been a couple character-driven movies on the shark scale that I've enjoyed, like Piranha Sharks. However, this movie is not one of those movies, as the characters are just not all that interesting for the most part, and just didn't really do it for me. And did I mention the movie's way too long? You easily could cut out 25 minutes of the movie and it would have been a much more enjoyable time. It makes the story really drag, like it just drags in the mud, and that's the best way to describe the plot. So what about the sharks? Well, you know what? These sharks are actually really well done in many aspects. I'm pretty sure they just straight use real sharks for the most part, and that's why they actually, look really good and animate really fluidly, if there even is any animation, which it doesn't seem like there is at all, but I'm sure there is at some point. All I can do is give praise because it's literally real sharks. Like, it doesn't get any better than that. It's real life, which is a nice touch. I'm sure there is some B-roll sprinkled in here and there, but I can say it all looked original to me, so at least it was a new B-roll. And the sharks were real, so there you go. Fantastic, I guess, by like default. Something that was not fantastic was the screen time for these sharks, or how consistently they showed up on screen. Of course, in the beginning they're there a bit, but after that first scene, they just disappear. Like, legit, they just disappear from the movie completely. They're gone for probably 45 minutes, minus one really, really quick scene. They just totally disappear. And you forget the movie has anything even to do with sharks. Sure, other marine life shows up, but this is the shark scale. I want to see the sharks. Once they're back out on the water, an hour into the movie, some sharks show up a bit more. Not like an absolute ton, but a bit for sure. But yeah, that consistency, or really lack of, it really hurts the movie greatly. There's just too much character development and not enough shark. But how are the kills in the movie? Well, they're not very good either. There are a couple kills in the movie, and I'll be honest, all of them minus one are just a waste. The biggest problem with all of them is it's just way too dark to see what's happening in this movie when they get killed. Like, I barely know what's going on, let alone seeing someone get killed. It's just far too dark for its own good, and it's heavily obscured everything. It ruined what kills they were gonna be. The one at the beginning isn't crazy dark, but this one's just okay. I'll be honest, it's about as realistic as if a shark grabbed you in real life. And these were real sharks for the most part, so there is that. The one kill that was pretty good was at the end where the shark jumps into the air and kills somebody. That was a good one. The kills, though, were really underwhelming. Even if they are taken mostly realistically, I just want to actually see them, and you can barely even do that here. Again, it's just far too dark for anything noticeable to show up. So what's here could be pretty good, but unfortunately it's just totally obscured, and there's really not even anything to comment on at this point. With this in mind, unfortunately the kills, there's just really nothing to it, which is a shame. Okay, so for such a character-driven movie with so much character development and acting, how is the acting? Well, the acting in this movie's alright. Obviously, Halle Berry's gonna be good with whatever she's given, and she's easily the best actress in the movie, and is genuinely very good. She's able to portray emotion extremely well, and is above all else believable. She starts out really fun and loving, and then she really goes down this dark, depressing spiral, it seems, and she's able to portray that very well, I think. And everyone else, well, that's a different story. Everyone else is genuinely mediocre, and then a few characters are just bad. The other main side characters are just kind of mediocre and don't really portray anywhere near as much emotion or just really anything. They just kind of exist as well. And the super side characters that show up for like a scene or two, well, the less said the better. The acting was just kind of mixed overall, with some good, but mostly just mediocrity. Alright, so here we come to the conclusion. Is Dark Tide good? Like, at all? Well, no, not really. Sadly, Dark Tide really just kind of gets swept up and it's on the tide and just goes out. And that's the best way to describe the movie. It gets lost. Like, it's a very mixed bag. The sharks are realistic. They might be real life for the most part and are handled very well. The way they are portrayed is pretty good. And the way Halle Berry is in the movie in terms of acting and her role, yeah, it's pretty good. And the story initially isn't that bad, and one of the kills is awesome. Unfortunately, the movie's just too long. The pacing's just bad. The story gets really quite mediocre. Some of the other actors are mediocre, and the dark in Dark Tide describes the kills in this movie. It's too dark. Above all else, the movie just, if I didn't make this clear, drags crazy long, and it does the worst thing a movie could do, which is just be boring. The movie's not absolutely awful. There's no terrible tiny budget here, and the movie's confident in itself, and it doesn't have any gaping plot holes, and at least it tells a story and has real actors, sure. But despite all this, the movie is terribly boring, and to be honest, it just doesn't benefit anyone. It's not absolute flaming garbage, but this movie is very mediocre to just bad, and Halle Berry could really not save it, and it just goes on and on and on, and it just doesn't do anything interesting at all. It really doesn't. And so it's like the movie should be better than this, but it isn't, and especially given the talent and the budget and the sharks, and that's what made it disappointing. So sadly, I have to give it the same score that I've given all these other movies that are just garbage, and I wouldn't say this movie's even as bad as those, but it gets a 1 out of 5 on the shark scale. Despite those positives I mentioned, it's just way too boring for its own good and just totally drags it down to a 1 out of 5, and anything higher would just be way too generous for me. So for the guy who requested this movie, I'm sorry, but it was just too boring. And if you like this movie, more power to you, but I was falling asleep a majority of the movie. In fact, I actually had to go back and watch scenes from the movie to try to remember what even happened to this movie because it was just such a blur. And this may be the most boring movie I've watched all year for this channel, or one of the most boring at the very least. Anyway, hopefully the next movie is much, much better than this. I'll see you guys on the shark scale.